was for a juicy news. Bema Obibia Aquaba. Latest hot Aqua Eramede Bremo. Now, answer and something in Abebano, so we now subscribe. Bomodia say, over subscribe to channel. Now, while like video, give us a thumbs up. Nafi, Sheba, Wofufro, so that when you be here now, and somewhere Koso, Ewo, Ghana, Bemoadam. Afi, you share a year and somewhere Abeto, Yeponoso. Yinti a year, some Kumoya, Ababetuja, Yinti a year, Sasabi, Mighty.
I think it's important to make the statement that protests are a necessary part of democracy.
Right.
Protests, very, very necessary. You can't eliminate protest and have a democratic situation. The right to free expression, it's embedded in the right of people to protest, But what do you protest about? You can protest about the fact that the price of rice has gone down. And I'm sure you've all seen the video which has gone viral. A young man who is busily protesting that since Mahama came to power, he has forced the price of rice down. And he's wondering whether Mahama thinks that he doesn't have enough money to buy rice and so on. You see that protest?
I've seen it.
It's a legitimate protest.
Very interesting.
It's a legitimate protest.
Yeah, I've seen that video.
You can't kick against that, But there's an important question that we need to ask and answer. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about the interpretation of law. Okay. When there's disagreement about the interpretation of law, what do? Do you shake your waist, wave your fist, and sing Jama songs? How does that resolve the problem of disagreement over the interpretation of law? You don't shake your waist, swing your fist, and sing Jama songs. It doesn't resolve anything. Okay, so I think it's important for us to understand that. Now, when you're on this program with somebody like Eric, you are constrained a little. You understand? And that's a real problem.
Oh, okay, see why.
I think
don't let your head speak to you.
I know.
Then you are constrained a little. But Eric, listen. The case that the High Court determined was not based on mathematics.
Right.
It was not based on mathematics at all.
Right.
The High Court was not counting votes. It was not counting valid votes and invalid votes. What the High Court decided simply was that the wrong procedure and processes were followed in the declaration of that result. The case simply is that the electoral officer for that constituency created a new coalition center by himself without notifying the NDC candidate. This is the case.
That's it. Simple.
So, number of valid votes and invalid votes, pink sheets and so on, they don't arise at all. Did the electoral officer by himself create a new coalition center without involving one of the sites in that election? That's the issue. Finish. No more. Okay? So it's not about who got 3,000 votes and who got 2,000 votes. This is the gravamen of the case. Now, be that as it is, the High Court made a determination, okay? And then an appeal was filed. Now, you know that I'm not a lawyer, so I don't pretend to be one, okay? But the law as it stands, and the Speaker of Parliament explained that very well, and he's a long-standing lawyer, that the appeal acts as a stay of execution for 7 days. 7 days only. That's what the law says. Yeah. 7 days. That 7 days has elapsed. Yeah. What's your problem? In any case, between yesterday and today, you're talking about 24 hours. The court is going to make a determination today. So, why the rush? The court is going to make a determination today. Now, you see, so many things have changed over the years. Some of the things that happened yesterday in the 1960s and 1970s would have resulted in people going to prison today for contempt. There's an application before the Court of Appeal. 24 hours before the court sits, somebody who is a lawyer addresses a press conference and is warning the Court of Appeal judges not to take a certain position. That's clear contempt. Clear contempt. Who are you? Before the judges have heard the case, to hold a press conference to warn the judges that they must take a particular decision or that you will hold them responsible for the chaos that will happen in the country and that if they take a certain line of action or certain decision, they'll be seen as being manipulated by the executive.
Yeah, but
that's so insulting.
Kwesi,
yes, sir.
You know there's background to that comment.
It's a bad comment.
The minority
it's an
leader,
insult to the bench.
The minority leader just last week held a news conference on this same matter. What he said was that the judges are pandering to the whims and caprices of their paymasters. So I'm saying that comment...
Paymasters?
Oh yeah, he said that.
Yeah, but that's an allegation.
So that's where the man he's drawing inspiration from somewhere.
Yeah, but Master, that's a serious allegation. To say that justices are pandering to their paymasters is to suggest a serious case of corruption and bribery. You understand? Under normal circumstances, why? The Chief Justice should be calling for an investigation into that allegation. Bring your facts to show that judges are being paid to take a certain decision. Yeah. You see? And if the judiciary, if the bench were to take such a position, you know what will happen?
Yeah.
People will end up in jail.
Let me read a story on my Joe Online, just briefly, so that I'm not said to have misquoted.
So that's the jail. What's the basis of that allegation?
This is a story. Obviously, Minority Leader Alexander Afenyo Markin has launched a scathing attack on, and this is my Joe Online, a scathing attack on Ghana's judiciary, accusing it of acting in the interest of political actors, following the Tamale High Court decision, political actors, to annul the 2024 parliamentary election in the Kwandai constituency. On Monday, the court upheld blah, 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 blah. Addressing journalists in Parliament on Wednesday, November 26, Afenyo Markin described the court's conduct as shameful, insisting judges were serving the interests of their paymasters.
Paymasters? I mean, look, I don't think that we should get there. I mean, where we are going is very slippery. You understand? To accuse a judge or judges of pandering to their paymasters is a serious allegation, which cannot be taken lightly by anybody. And yet people hold press conferences, make these statements, and just walk back home. I think it's unfair. It's unfair to the judges, it's unfair to the other party in the case, and it's unfair to those of us who are victims of the misinformation they're spreading. You understand? It's a very serious, matter. But listen, just now, this morning, when I came here, I heard the Minority Chief Whip actually threatening that government business will suffer. And I'm wondering how. Yesterday, in the midst of the Jama and the wrist shaking and waist shaking and all of that, all of government business went through. Budgetary allocations for major strategic sectors of the economy were approved. How did it suffer? Even yesterday, in the midst of the black and so on, government business went on. I mean, I would, and I don't speak for them. I don't even have the right to think for them and so on. But if I were in their position, yesterday was a fine opportunity to explain the alternatives that the NPP has to government projections. Fine opportunity. The whole world is listening to you. The media is there. Live coverage on television. Government is proposing to allocate resources to key sectors of the national economy. And you are there singing Jama songs. listen, an opportunity to say that, look, if we had power, we would not allocate so many millions to this sector. We would rather allocate to that other sector and so on. That opportunity was missed yesterday.
Right.
You know, and I'm quite sure, and I mean it, I'm quite sure that there are many people who are either members or sympathizers of the New Patriotic Party who are completely, you know, disgusted by what is happening. Look, 1992, you know, the NPP had, not 1992, I think it was 1996.
96, okay.
The NPP had a very small number of members of parliament, led by people like J.H. Minster and so on. Look at how they use parliament to their advantage. Look at the issues they raise. Look at the alternatives they put forward and so on. Today, if you look at the NPP, it still has a small minority, you understand. It's not able to project anything. It's all about being boisterous and so on. And where does that leave us? You know, one of the things that impressed me the most yesterday was the way the speaker comported himself. The speaker was very measured and carried on the duty of parliament, you know, as if nothing was wrong. And in the end, all the bills which were submitted in parliament yesterday were approved without any hiccup and so on. I mean, that mastery performance of the speaker is commendable.
Right.
You know, it's highly commendable. The speaker conducted himself very well yesterday.
Okay.
There have been references to an earlier ruling of the speaker. Mm-hmm. And I've taken the time to read the ruling of the speaker. What the speaker said was that, look, he was not going to declare the seat vacant at that time. That it was too early to declare the seat vacant. And that certain conditions needed to mature before the seat could be declared vacant.
Yes.
Those conditions matured in 7 days. So the speaker has not contradicted himself in any way. You understand? I hope, and I do hope, that for the sake of deepening democratic practice in Ghana, whilst upholding the principle that we can protest about everything and anything, I mean, you can protest about everything. You can protest, you know, about the fact that your neighbor is wearing a red shirt,
right,
you know, and that red shirt upsets you, and so on. You can organize a protest around that, and so on. Whilst upholding that principle,
okay,
those who exercise that right, I think ought to take this country a little more seriously than they do.
Let me read a few messages and then we'll take a break and then we'll come back and look at some other topics. We have about 2 more to go. So, this one here from Reverend Jones Latte, who's watching us from the UK. He's a lawyer and also a media practitioner. He says the kudos to Kwesi for holding up. African leaders have sold out to the West. When the US and UK destroyed Libya, leading to the death of Gaddafi, African leaders kept quiet. Only Mugabe spoke against the onslaught of Libya. How will restore African dignity in 2026? Now, and it says on the second issue, an application of stay of execution does not nullify a standing judgment until a superior court has dealt with the application. If so, the application of stay of execution may not stop a Speaker of Parliament from acting on the standing judgment. Of course, it is reasonable for the Speaker to wait till the case is decided by the appeal judge. That's from Reverend Jones Latte. Musa Batua from Asawasi says that, good morning, the shameful conduct of the micro-minority was annoying and disgusting. Reducing parliament to such a low level. The very people who are touted themselves, who have touted themselves, once touted themselves as apostles of the rule of law, those who eat, drink, bathe, and sleep at the court are today behaving lawlessly. They have quickly forgotten about the Honorable Gyamfi Kwesi case. Their sudden disregard for due process exposes the political expediency behind their actions. It is disappointing and dangerous for our democracy. Bo Bachman, who is one of the strategists for Kojo Kyeremanteng, who is the founder and leader of the UP political movement, he says that the good people of Ghana, if the NPP couldn't govern responsibly in power and still cannot conduct itself properly in opposition, then perhaps it's time to collapse it altogether and replace it with the UP, which has proven far more disciplined and responsible. Alfred Kojo Kyeremanteng says, good morning, Moro, and to your cherished viewers. Permit me to use your medium to plead to the Speaker of Parliament to stop being lenient and crack the whip. Moro, Article 42 of our Constitution says that every citizen of Ghana, 18 years and above, and of sound mind, has a right to vote. But it's unfortunate Ghanaians do not know the kind of people they are voting for, if they are also of a sound mind or not. The view that some MPs of the minority need some kind of, that's a bit harsh. But it says they need something. I'll now mention that. Their behavior yesterday simply tells it that they are not fit to be in Parliament, let alone to be called honourable members. That's coming from Treadles. I don't know what your thoughts are on this whole debate. And Uncle Zaro, I want to start with you, as to be Eric. What's your thoughts on?
Not to start with Eric.
No, I mean, I'm flexible.
I don't have a problem.
You know, when it comes to you, anything for you, sir.
No, I don't have a problem at all. If Eric wants to start, I'll be quite comfortable
that's fine.
with that.
Obviously, that's fine. Let's go. Let's start with you, yes.
I think one of the most important things about this debate is that it is not a partisan issue. There are some from the New Patriotic Party who have said that, look, scrap that office. It's not performing.
Yeah.
And there are some from the National Democratic Congress who have also argued very strongly that the office should be scrapped. So on both sides of the argument, you find people from all political parties and so on. And for me, that is healthy. If we can approach this discussion, this debate, without our partisan lenses, perhaps the outcome will be better than what it was, 7-8 years ago when we were establishing that office. I've heard Mr. Sam Okujato, somebody that I know very well, I've worked with before. I've heard Professor Michael Quay, and so on. I've heard them. And the question that I've asked myself is, how come that 7 years, 8 years ago, they had these positions, but they didn't express them? Because if they had expressed these positions at that time, perhaps we would not have established the Office of Special Prosecutor. We were lone voices. Those of us who kicked against the establishment of this office were lone voices. Now, I came from the point of view that, look, to be able to establish such an office, one, you need to amend the Constitution. You cannot establish this office without amending the Constitution. Because in the Constitution, the power to prosecute is vested only in the Attorney General. You understand? We were not listened to. Now, the other argument that we made then was that the establishment of the Office of Special Prosecutor was meant to cure two things. The perception of political bias in prosecutions. That because the Attorney General sits in cabinet and actually is appointed by the President and so on, people are likely to read politics into persecutions for corruption. And to cure that, we need to have an independent body and so on. The second perception was that if you have an Attorney General, because of his links with government and ruling party and so on, he's not likely to go after people in government or associated with government who are caught up in corruption.
Right.
The mere fact that the special prosecutor is also appointed by the president knocks out all these considerations. True. So these considerations are no longer important. It's appointed by the president the same way the Attorney General is appointed by the president.
Right.
You understand? So it knocks it out completely. So what is left? This humongous office is created, giving so much resources, and nothing works. Okay? And it's not because we have a bad special prosecutor. That's not the issue. For some of the things that he has to do, he still needs the permission and fiat of the Attorney General. For example, this case of extraditing Ofori Atta. He can't do it. He is not the Attorney General. He needs to rely on the Attorney General.
Because America won't deal with any office of special prosecutor.
Exactly.
They don't know them.
Exactly. So he's been given a position. He doesn't have enough powers, to do his work. Now, at any time, if he's prosecuting a case and the Attorney General decides, it hasn't happened yet, but it could happen, that he wants to take over that prosecution, what is he going to do? How is he going to fight the Attorney General? Because the power to prosecute is vested in the Attorney General, not the Office of Special Prosecutor. The Office of Special Prosecutor, in fact, acts more or less on behalf of the Attorney General. Now, nobody listened to these arguments when they were made in the past, okay? Because the NPP had promised that if it came into office, if it won the election, to do this. It wanted the appearance that it was fulfilling its electoral promises, and in any case, it had in mind a special prosecutor who it believed would go after NDC leaders and so on. That was all. That's how we created this huge contraption which has become the center of debate and controversy and so on. And to be honest with you, sometimes I really pity Kwesi Agyapong.
Why?
Because it's not about him. And yet he's been made the center of this controversy. I don't know whether you've read the piece which was written by Kweku Annan.
Yes, I've seen that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant.
In fact, I didn't mention that in my opening remarks.
An office, you have a special prosecutor who is supposed to hold people in government accountable.
Yeah.
Now, who best would he be focusing on other than the finance minister who controls the government purse? And yet, for him to get resources to do his work, he has to go to the Minister of Finance. And what an incredible situation. This guy is supposed to be looking after the finances of the country to make sure that things are done properly and so on. The man in charge of the country's finances is the man who decides how much he should get to do his work. That's a huge problem. You understand?
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one. You understand? If you look at the apparatus, this investigative apparatus, how sophisticated is it?
Yeah.
Compare what he has to the Criminal Investigations Department or the BNI and so on. Now, how much power does he have to compel the other investigative agencies to work with him on the basis of his dictates and so on? He doesn't have any such power. Yeah. So you've created a facade, and then put somebody in there, and you expect him to do wonders. He can't do wonders. The foundations on which the office itself stands are very, very weak foundations. You understand? So this really, I think, is a needless debate. From the beginning, the office should not have been established. It's a waste of everybody's time. Establishing that office was a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
But you know what happened? Why that office was established?
Okay.
At the time, the NPP or people in the NPP were anxious to prove that they were keeping their campaign promises. They wanted to demonstrate to the people of Ghana that they were serious about fighting corruption and so on. So those were the motivations. The NDC, on the other hand, and its leaders did not want to be seen to be obstructing anything linked with the fighting of corruption. You understand?
Sure.
So everybody, for the purpose of convenience, allowed this thing to pass through. And this is the monster we have created. You understand? We created a huge monster. This story about the special prosecutor, that there were 2 assassinations.
Yeah, their lives are in danger.
I knew this story way back.
Yeah.
I knew this story way back, and perhaps I don't know whether I should say it now. Maybe it's not.
No, it's time. No, it's time. It's time.
No, it's not convenient.
Because the cat has already been let out of the bag.
Yeah, but it's not how I got to know the story.
Oh, you mean how you got to know?
How I got to know.
But at least you can tell us what you know.
Yes, because I got to know the story.
Okay.
And from what I got to know at that time, the incident occurred around Roman Ridge. Okay. One of the incidents at least occurred around Roman Ridge.
Okay.
And it was on the basis of that the special prosecutor asked a friend of his to give me a bulletproof car. And I was very uncomfortable with that. You understand? Because if you are in that position, you should not be taking favors, receiving favors from even your friends and so on.
Because so they can compromise you.
If your life actually depended on a friend who provided you a bulletproof car, then there's a problem.
That's a problem.
You know. But perhaps one day I'll be able to explain the circumstances under which I got to know about this allegation. And it's interesting. Okay? If indeed it is true that he had 2 assassination attempts, then there's a problem. Today I've seen some of the newspapers saying that it was a lie because he didn't report to the police and so on. I personally asked him why he didn't go to the police and said, for what purpose? He knew that nothing would come out of it, that he decided not to go to the police because he believed strongly that nothing would come out of it. You understand?
Well, it was the Interior Minister who was asking those questions, that there's no any records of the police, you know, with the police that such a thing had happened to them. He was wondering why.
Yeah. But when I got to know, I knew that there were no police records.
Why?
And my source told me that there were no police records because he didn't have sufficient confidence that if it was reported, it would be dealt with properly. And, Master, things happen to all of us and we let it go. Look, why? I've been abused on many occasions by state institutions and so on. I've decided to let it go. Does it mean that I wasn't abused?
That's true.
I've been abused, you know, on many occasions. I mean, anyway.
Except that perhaps the claim would have been more credible if there was any record of it being launched with the...
There's no record of the abuses that I've suffered in my life.
Well, anyway, that's
no official record of the abuses that I've suffered in my life.
I agree with you.
Does that mean that I was
less credible? Right. I get that.
Well,
I get that. Eric, I don't know where you stand on this.
So I mean, I think it was yesterday or so. There's a show on one of the other platforms where you had, I think it was Ace and Kuma and somebody else. I've forgotten who exactly. Yeah. And so I listened to.
You watched that show?
Yeah, and
okay.
it was an interesting take on the issues. And I think that by and large, a lot of people have spoken about the legal aspect, the legalese of it and all of that. And I remember the arguments prior to the setting up of the OSP where the initial conversation was, why don't we decouple the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice so that you would have a minister responsible for justice, the judiciary, and have an Attorney General who is purely a government political person. And that argument, of course, was lost. I think that even in a couple of our manifestos, we spoke about it before the issue of the setting up a special prosecutor office. I mean, and in hindsight, when it comes to public policy, I mean, you always also have to give yourself an opportunity to do a post-evaluation of whatever it is that you envisaged. And I think that the principle and the idea behind the setting up of the Office of the Special Prosecutor would, of course, to even a cursory observer, be one born out of good intent to ensure that we have an independent prosecutor who will be able to look at these things and be able to prosecute without fear or favor. However, I mean, my position on some of these things is that, I mean, it's almost as if that in this country, we allow the horses to bolt before, so even institutions are set up in such a way that the act should have happened so that we will find somebody who will go and prosecute these persons. And that mindset for me sometimes is a bit problematic because you have a situation where a vast majority of these issues that are dealt with by even the existing architecture prior to the OSP has to do with procurement and administrative issues and issues to do with decisions that have been taken by public office holders. And yet, we do not put that same amount of energy in putting together systems and mechanisms to forestall that, for that to even happen. I mean, we're talking about 2025, and in all the attempts that we've made to even ensure that we have these e-procurement platforms and, I mean, use technology to be able to make it transparent and open has basically been ignored, right? They're probably not even properly resourced. However, for some weird reason, we find wisdom in setting up these huge offices and putting these bureaucracies in place to deal with issues that, if we had taken a bit of time and even had a proper thinking through, would find solutions to. I mean, to digress a bit, sometimes when I sit down and I watch the Public Accounts Committee and the issues that they're dealing with, even at the scale of district assemblies and everything. To be honest, I know that would be a bit controversial. I don't find those things as corruption, to be honest with you. I find this as administrative things that can be dealt with as a goal. 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, somebody making a decision, paying without a voucher, and all of those things are things that, if the state is minded by this thing, you will not come back again in 2026 and go and sit at a Public Accounts Committee or have an Auditor General's report that the same issues follow through every single year. You know, and so, I mean, sometimes when I sit back and if you're not careful, you would say things that you're not supposed to say on platforms like that. How is it the case that the same things pertains? Since 1992, you can take the Auditor General's report and it's administrative, it has issues to do with going through the right processes, procurement breaches, left, right, and center. Yet, in terms of finding solutions, the first thing that we will think about is, put another office that will deal with the issues when you can use conventional or contemporary practices in the private sector to deal with these issues. Do you understand what I'm saying? So even issues to do with an audit. You have an institution, every public sector institution has an internal auditor that sits there. Apart from the internal auditor, they have auditors, like external auditors that come and auditing the processes. So even the audit itself is not about finding or trying to penalize people, but it's about auditing the processes and the solutions and whatever. And so it's like a holistic overview of your business or your service or whatever it is that you are engaged in over a period. And then what the report does is to look at various loopholes within that particular thing and then give you timelines to fix it. Yeah. So in the case where these things are not fixed and these things keep occurring, then it means that we need to find like solutions, like lasting solutions, either administrative wise, either processes wise, making sure that there's a strict adherence. So for example, there is absolutely no excuse for anybody to even make payments outside of the government system to start with. So that is where you start from, right? How difficult is it to pre-vet suppliers to start with for either vehicles or consumables or, I mean, how difficult is that? Because the private sector organizations, from my experience, do that. Prior to the start of the year, they will come up with a list, a scope of things that is needed and say, okay, we are going to purchase this, we are going to do this, we are going to do this. This is the price range that we are going to pay. These are the quality of whatever it is that we are looking for. If you are a supplier, you have all the correct regulatory whatever, bring your samples, let's put a team together, let's make a determination. So that as a state, if we are dealing with issues to do with corruption, we are dealing with grand scale, you understand, grand scale issues. Otherwise, I mean, we will do this back and forth, we'll put a PAC committee, they will sit, they will take their allowances, people will go, there are all sorts of untold things that people have complained about, even that pertains and all of that. And we keep going on and on and on and on about these things. So for me, I believe that yes, the OSP is going through certain challenges. But the question is that, is it the first thing that you do to scrap an institution because you're facing certain challenges? Maybe with the amount of investment that has gone into that, we can have to probably do a proper introspection and say, okay, these are the things that we believe that we can support the OSP with to make it a bit more efficient, to find out there's proper synergies between the OSP and Attorney General to start with. And then also start thinking properly about, do we want to decouple this age-old debate about decoupling the Attorney General and the Ministry of Justice to make the judiciary truly independent, so that we will not be coming back, because even in terms of the institutions, people have spoken about other institutions that as this and as Shraj and all of those things that are all part of the constitutional architecture that would have been able to deal with some of these challenges, so that we don't come back to these issues of like we are finding people guilty when the horses has already bolted. So then if you have people who, even with all the loophole, like the obstacles in place and all the checks and balances, still engage in acts of corruption and everything, then by all means, the state would actually be able to hone in on those people and prosecute them, so that at least it becomes a deterrent. But it's like we have conversation around corruption, but the solutions are there, and then we allow these things to happen before, I mean, anything is done. And the OSP would face challenges, because in as much as you're there to do a job, the fundamental human rights of the people that are accused are also there. You understand? So, but in this country, sometimes the mere fact that an allegation is made actually means that the person is guilty. So the pressure is also on the OSP to prosecute. But if you're being governed by the tenets of a democracy, then the mere fact that allegation has been made should not lead to a prosecution. So if you're going to judge the OSP based on the number of prosecutions or the number of successful prosecutions that is being made, then maybe we are in the wrong place. We're probably looking at it from a different perspective. You can also argue that the mere presence of an OSP might even serve as a deterrent to to people. You understand what I'm saying? Right. But if you're saying that you haven't prosecuted anybody, and the mere fact that they haven't prosecuted anybody means that the office is not fit for purpose, it is a very lame argument, because at the end of the day, you have to find the person culpable beyond reasonable doubt. Right. And the onus is on the prosecutor to prove that. Do you understand? So,
but Eric, if you listen to the argument that's been canvassed by the Venerable Kwesi Pratt, and indeed it's not just him, there's many others who have made the same point, that to the extent that the office has very limited powers, we won't be able to reap the full benefits of setting up such an office until we're able to hive off the Attorney General's hive of the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice.
Yes, yeah.
In fact, Esan Kumadia, he's even recommending and suggesting, proposing that we merge the Office of the Special Prosecutor into the Department of Public Prosecution. Yeah. And make this more powerful.
Because I agree.
So that you, the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, the Attorney General, isn't it? Just advise the President and the state. Don't bother yourselves
on prosecutions and everything.
Yes, right? Forget about those things and leave those ones to the Department of Public.
I agree with Uncle Kwesi on the matter of the constitutional challenge with the Attorney General, and again, even the matter of principle, where again you have. So we've practiced this democracy for a while. We've had this constitution for a while. At the point when it was enacted, it made sense. There's nothing wrong in doing a proper evaluation and saying that if we really want to make this fair, and
obviously, please check for us. I don't know whether it's an entrenched law or there's one that Parliament can just do away with.
Right. And then even if we say that, okay, based on all of these things, to even cure this whole mischief of the Attorney General can wake up and say that, I'm filing a nolle prosequi on a matter, and then in the same
The OSP
space,
comes to Jack.
Yeah, you understand? In the same vein, right, would be pursuing another matter, right? So we are trying to cure either political influence or all of these things. Yet the architecture itself
It's problematic.
It's problematic. Yes. You understand? And we need to have these hard conversations and say that it is problematic. Let's fix it. I'm not sure what the current recommendations are from even this new constitutional review conversation that are doing. But it's one of those things that I believe strongly that we can do. And then probably strengthen our internal audit systems, make them more independent. They should, if you have an internal auditor that reports a CEO, a minister, or whatever, that defeats the purpose. You understand what I'm saying? And so these are certain things that we can do so that we can focus the energies on finding people who are doing grand scale stuff rather than administrative things that we can fix.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. Like and share the video. You can also drop your comment. Please don't forget to subscribe. Click on the bell to turn on the notification.